And Amira, I'll say more of a word about Amira after Elaine and Marcel are done. So Elaine and Marcel, the floor is yours. We're happy to have you here tonight. Welcome.
I'm going to let my daughter Marcel start. She wrote something after I was denied entry to our home in Bethlehem, and she would like to read that.
Hi, thank you all for being here. So my name is Marcel, and I am doing my Master's in Global Affairs and International Peace Studies at Notre Dame. For the past 2 years, I've been meeting through my school world-renowned politicians, and none of them could answer my question, which was, in 2018, Israel extended a ban on family reunification. This means that I, from Bethlehem, can't marry and live with my spouse from Nazareth, for example. I ask, if this had happened in Jesus' time, what would Mary and Joseph do? So far, none of the politicians I met could answer my question. Many of them did not believe what I said. And now, unfortunately, I find myself in a situation of family separation. Also, can we just agree that this is absurd? My mom and dad should be allowed to live together in their home of 28 years. And I shouldn't have to censor my heart of who I fall in love with or marry out of fear that I would be in the same situation as my parents. I mean, can you imagine? Hey, you're kind of cute, but let me see your ID first before we can fall in love because I don't want you to get deported. It's kind of a buzzkill. So, as I approach my final weeks at Notre Dame, it's been very difficult for me to talk about what's happening and focus on my studies. So that's why I wrote something I shared on Facebook. So if you would allow me to read that to you. It seems to me like all I have been doing this past week was retyping my message. What words and conglomerations of sentences can I orchestrate to adequately describe the songs of hurt, fear, and anxiety that are born from separation? Not physical separation, but that which is legislative and seemingly definitive without appropriate recourse and action. As many of you may know, from my family's posts or from the multitude of friends and supporters who have spoken out, my mother was denied entry to her home and family. My mother traveled in hopes of reaching Palestine, to only be met with the most strongly supported bureaucracy. She was detained for 12 hours or so before embarking on an emotionally heavy journey back to where she had started. 62 hours later, she was back in the US, carrying the same luggage, but having misplaced her hope. Now carrying sorrow and despair. Easter passed, Christ resurrected, and with the newborn hope, we have found ourselves nowhere near to knowing our fate. My brother's May wedding fast approaches, as our minds can no longer silence and ignore our heartbroken question. What will become of my brother's joyous occasion? Where will my mother be? Will we not be able to celebrate it as a family? Will we find each other home again, or are we doomed to lead a family life of separation, trying our best to bridge and traverse the void that was created through the miracles of technology? While the internet and technology are both great, I cannot feel my mother's warm embrace or loving presence through them. You, my friends, family, acquaintances, and I may not see eye to eye politically, but I hope that you understand that this tragedy is a personal one, which affects my family and I. It is not a political stance, nor statement, but a call for unity and for the protection of the individual and family. It is only a political are offended by my family's pain and suffering, and for those who are unwilling to speak out against injustice. The Haaretz article describes my family's ordeal, and I cannot but echo my father's words and add to them. We will not hate. We will not fear this injustice, but instead, we will continue to celebrate life. Instead, we will continue to celebrate life together, and in our celebration, work towards furthering justice and ending injustice. Finally, the great Rumi once said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And our hearts are open and remain open to love and justice. Thank you for those who continue to support us and hold us in their prayers. Our whole and united family hopes to invite you all to a celebration of justice and life in our home someday soon. Let us rewrite history and proudly proclaim that there is room in the inn and room for all. A family separated but never divided. Thank you.
We've been doing a lot of crying in our house lately, so I, for one, am very sorry to be with you tonight because I would rather be in Bethlehem, which is where I'm supposed to be. After surviving 28 years of marriage, I feel like Israel should just give us a pass. You know, you've made it this far, you can continue. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. And this is something that I've been facing ever since we got married in 1990. Our married life has been defined by the length of my tourist visa, and the tourist visa is what Israel gives to me. There have been times when they gave me only 7 days. There have been times when I got a year, and that was lovely, and then it was renewable for a year, and that was even better. My constant fear has always been on that flight back to Tel Aviv, because I never knew, are they going to let me in this time? They've let me in until April 2nd or 3rd of this year. They told me they were denying my entry. They said I can never enter through Ben-Gurion Airport. There is a chance that I will be allowed to enter through the Allenby Bridge, which means flying to Jordan, the neighboring country, and then crossing by land. But I have to get pre-permission from the Israelis to do that. And so I am waiting right now. I've applied for the permission. As in everything under Israeli occupation, there's no guarantee or recourse. I can't force them to say yes. They're going to allow me in. But from my perspective, when you're married, this is a human issue. It should never have been a political issue, but it's now being used as a political issue. I feel like from the very beginning, most countries offer some sort of protection to spouses where you can reside in the country of your spouse. So I'm in limbo at the moment. Amira has strongly encouraged us to get a lawyer, but even that makes me angry because the burden is always on the Palestinians. You know, if the Israelis are trying to confiscate their land, the burden is on the Palestinian to go to an Israeli court, which is not there in their favor, to try and keep their land. So now I'm in the position, if I hope to live with my spouse, of getting a lawyer, going through the Israeli court system to try and live with my spouse. So I would like to remind Israel that they have a human rights obligation to the Palestinians. And I don't know, we're just living on hopes and prayers at the moment. I'll be crushed if I can't be there for my son's wedding, but I'm also prepared in case everyone else in the family is there but me. Like I said, we're very teary. So anyway, thank you. We've had a lot of comments, a lot of support. Thank you for that, and thank you to Amira for writing her article and making it public what's going on. It's a system that's set up to fail for the Palestinians. You apply, you apply, you apply, and you're always denied.
Tell us how many families this impacts?
30,000 spouses, families.
Registered. Applied for it. Applied for family registration. You don't know how many did even apply.
Okay, so that's 30,000 who've registered. We don't know how many overall, but 30,000 who have actually applied. Yep. Okay, thanks.
We love you, Elaine.
There'll be time for some questions for Elaine and Marcel later, along with Amira. Amira Hass is the only child of a Sarajevo-born Jewish mother who survived 9 months in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, and a Romanian-born Jewish father who survived 3 wartime years in a ghetto. Amira joined the Israeli daily newspaper Haaretz in 1989 and has been its correspondent for the occupied territories since 1993. She lived in Gaza for 3 years, and she's lived in the West Bank city of Ramallah since 1997. There's much more that we can say about her biography, but I'll let her say that during her talk tonight. So Amira, if you'll come on up. We want to welcome you, Amira Hass. Now what we decided to do, Amira has asked me to start with maybe a question, which will kind of give kind of an impetus to her thoughts for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I want you to be thinking of questions that you may want to be asking her, because she really is much more wanting to answer your questions tonight. She has understood that we're a pretty educated audience. We're a pretty educated group about the Israel-Palestine issue here in this room. And so be thinking of the questions you want to ask her, because that's going to cover the evening tonight. So Amira, a number of folks who travel to Israel-Palestine, and those who don't, but who hear about the issue on the news, those who are even supportive of Palestinian struggle for human rights, try to draw the analogy between what's happening there and what's happened in our own colonial effort in this country with Native Americans. So talk about that a little bit, how it is, but how it is not. And also, I'm always asked when I talk, I'm always asked, is there hope? Can somehow can the Israeli colonial project be reversed? And if it can be, how can it be? Where's the hope? So we'll start with that, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for coming. I understood that indeed you all came to the country, or most of you, and you know. And I thought, what, I will start a long talk, a speech, or whatever. When I know that people like yourselves who know what the situation is, also are looking for tools to continue and be active, and to influence more. And maybe I can be of assistance here. You don't need me telling you a lot about the separation wall or about the situation in Jerusalem, because you are very informed and you want to be informed. That's a big difference from other people, and unfortunately I think it's very different from many of the Jews who live in this country, who do not want to know. That's why it's so easy for them to deny the evil system that we maintain in the country. We means Israel and Israeli governments and Israeli public that continues to support and to vote for this government. Officially, the title that was assigned to me here was about my work is covering Israeli colonialism. Or I would say that settler colonialism is a more appropriate title. And like just yesterday, I gave a talk which was a bit more theoretical about the Israeli settler colonialism. And following the question of yours, Michael, we are not unique. After all, settler colonialism projects or settler realities of settler colonialism are not particular for us. We are not an exception. You live in an accomplished settler colonial country, unfortunately. Australia, New Zealand, South America, Canada. We can name only maybe France as a settler colonial society, that established settler colonial society in Algiers that was really was made reversible, that was undone. The Pieds Noirs, the French colonizers of Algiers had to leave Algiers. But otherwise, I can't think of, even in Russia, even in the Russian Empire, where there were many acts of settler colonial projects, they continued. And people did not, the colonizers either took over a lot of the land and of political life, or became a great, almost half of the population, like in Latvia and Lithuania. So when we talk about settler colonialism, we talk about a historical movement or a historical phenomenon that has succeeded to a great extent, by which people from other countries came to a country inhabited by its original nations, removing them in this method or another, took over their land, and established a political system that excludes them, that excludes the indigenous people. You all live in this. You all live in this, and you are part of it. I don't see indigenous people. Maybe there are some. I don't know how you count the drops of blood, but you know what I mean. So I think it is important not to exceptionalize Israel in that sense, as a start, not to exceptionalize. There are some differences between Israeli colonialism or settler colonialism and others. One is that we have to admit the Jews do have a certain link, previous link, to the country. The Mayflower people did not have this kind of a link to America or to the Turtle Island. This doesn't mean that we have that it justifies the taking over and the land grab and the settling process and the expulsion of Palestinians. But it complicates a bit the picture. A little bit it is more, there is some kind of a twist in the plot or a curve in the plot. It's not so. This is one difference. Another difference is that the movement, the ideological movement that called Jews in the world to come and emigrate to Palestine, Zionism, was not popular among the Jews. Was not popular for quite a few decades since it was established by the second half of the 19th century. The great majority of Jews understood the message of Zionism as, or the establishment of Zionism as a way indeed to confront the anti-Semitic threat that was not invented, that was real in Europe. In many countries in Europe, in the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, like centuries before, Jews were persecuted, discriminated against, segregated in all kinds of ways, also killed by movements here and there, also evicted and expelled. And Zionism presented itself as a national movement which represents the Jews all over and offers a remedy to this problem of persecution. And the remedy is to emigrate to the Holy Land. But the majority of Jews wanted to remain in the diaspora. They did not opt for this emigration. When did they start to adopt, to embrace Zionism as a hopeful message and a hopeful ideology? Only when anti-Semitism became genocidal. Only with the advent of Hitler to power and Nazism to power. We cannot separate these two. And more than that, Western countries refused to accept Jewish refugees. During the war, or during the Third Reich, during the first formative years of the Third Reich in the 30s, during the war itself, and afterwards. So this is also a component that has to be taken into account when we regard the reality. Again, I want to stress, and I say to my Palestinian friends over and over again, it's not in order to exonerate Israeli practices and Israeli expulsions and Israeli discrimination. It is not for this. It is in order to understand this historical sequence that made people like my parents, for example, both Holocaust survivors who were communists, they were not Zionists at all, who wanted to, when they remained alive, unlike the great majority of their families in Romania and Yugoslavia, they wanted to go back to their respective countries. And when they returned to their respective countries, they felt a terrible void because so many of their Jewish family and friends were murdered, and because they discovered that they are not welcome. Even though they felt, my father felt Romanian, my mother felt Yugoslav, they were not welcome. So here is another difference when we talk about Israeli settler colonialism. And my parents came to the country. When I was 5 or 6, I remember, you know, I grew up in a very political family, and I remember asking my parents, how come you emigrated and you are not Zionists? I was old enough to ask these questions, but I was probably too young to get an answer from them. And I answered myself over the years when I learned about what it meant to be chased out, not only of Europe, but in a way to be chased out of the globe. And this is heavy. This is not a simple burden to carry. I still believe that if, of course we cannot prove it, but if United States was open for the Jews in the 40s, the great majority of refugees, of the Holocaust refugees and survivors, would have left for the States and other countries. Canada was very, very pro-Zionist because they didn't want Jews. We have to remember that. And now there is, I would say, a third difference. You know, when I go there were times when I went to Canada and Australia and here, the United States, I try to meet with indigenous people. First because I'm interested to know, to meet, to speak to them, to learn about their history, but also it gives me insight about our own case of settler colonialism. And it makes me understand better from this kind of more a situation that is not personally related to me. I may understand better the Palestinian situation, and I want to expand my understanding. And there is one thing that is standing out, a difference that is standing out. Most of the settler colonialisms of the 17th century, 18th century, 19th century made the indigenous peoples, they decimated them. They are decimated. The numbers of those people, the ratio between the indigenous people and the settlers is extremely big. So even in places where they were not not almost wiped out, like in New Zealand, the percentage of the indigenous people is very low in comparison to the settlers' population. You know United States better than I know, so you can see how this fits also into your reality. So the indigenous people of United States are not enough in order to create political leverage or any leverage on political life and decisions in this country. They cannot change in a substantial way the course of American policy. Because numbers, this quantity matters, it does matter. While happily, thankfully, Zionism as a settler colonial movement did not murder the Palestinians. There were massacres, yes, but there were also counter-massacres. People were killed, of course, in wars. And of course, Palestinians were expelled, but they were not decimated. Now in the country, there is almost the number of Jews and Palestinians is 50-50. I don't know, 100,000 more here or there, it's not important. The Palestinians have grown in number in comparison to 1948. The number has increased also outside the country and inside the country. And this is enormous a difference. And you ask me, Michael, where is hope? Here is one source of hope. They exist, they are present, Palestinians are, it's a massive group of population inside and outside the country. And we already see in the last 20 years that they have, their voice is much more heard than it ever was. That's because they exist. That's because they are numbers. They number. But it's not only a question of quantity. I know, I mean, I cover it all the time. So I noticed that in the 5 days that I've been here now in the States, away from my daily work of writing, and I feel like I'm almost like vacation, even though every day I give 2 or 3 talks. So it's not a vacation. But in comparison to the emotional stress under which we all live in the country, and I'm not a target of Israeli racist policies because I'm Jewish, but I live among Palestinians, I hear from them, I cannot escape it. I do not want to escape it. I write about it, and on top of this, people keep calling me to share with me, and sometimes to ask for advice or help, or and all sorts of issues. And this is an emotional burden for sure. So now here, to be 5 days away of it, I feel a bit even freshened up. But with all this, aware of the harsh life that Palestinians have to live, and you just got an example told to you by Elaine and Marcel, just this, look, imagine. And so many people have this problem of being, in a way, being illegal in their own homes. We sometimes, or we often, and Palestinians themselves, are not aware of their own strength, enormous strength, but not just strength, you know, to bear difficult things, but also strength to enjoy life in spite of everything. You know, I remember that when I started going to Gaza, this was I was a volunteer with a group which advocated rights for workers, workers' rights, and we challenged Israeli employers who didn't pay their Palestinian workers. And we would get the money, and I'd go to Gaza and meet people and meet the workers there. I noticed that there is the image of Gaza, true, it was 30 years ago, but all images of Gazans, of tough people and unfriendly, or all was untrue. They were always laughing. I always say, if I see a car full of people laughing, Palestinians, I know this must be Gazans. Much more than West Bankers in a way. Now I admit, I don't know if I think that today is much more difficult, but still there is some rootedness of the people that they themselves are not aware of. And this is a source of hope. At the same time, the Israeli right-wing, messianic, religious right-wing, becomes more and more outspoken in its calls for expulsions. Because they could not break the Palestinian people the ways that were tried until today. So I don't want to elude people that because Palestinians are rooted, then everything is okay, because the Israeli political scene is very dangerous today. So I'm not total, I mean, my hope is there, but also my fears are here. Elaine said something, Elaine said truly that I try to encourage her to go to a lawyer who will be able to go through this bureaucracy of occupation. But Elaine, I suggest this because the other option has not yet been taken. And in a way, it's only some lawyers who are trying to push for it. And this is a mass action of people affected. It's true about everything. Only popular struggles can move forward the Palestinian issue, truly. And I, like you, Elaine, I think it is insulting to have a lawyer to stand for your right to live in your own home. I agree with you. But as long as people do not act, people with the same problem, do not act as a group, 30,000 people, 20,000 people, you'll have to take a lawyer. And those lawyers that I know about are representing 5, 10, 30, 50 couples exactly in order to create some mass more pressure than when it is one individual or one couple only. Palestinians know that there should be, at one point, they should go back to a mass popular struggle. Right now, they don't do it, and for very reasonable reason. Because right now, it is clear that Israel will retaliate in such a way that they won't gain. Because there is no Palestinian leadership that can lead today, a trusted Palestinian leadership that can lead a solid mass struggle, popular struggle, civil struggle. There is no such trusted leadership. So people are wise. People know that they cannot, in such situation, cannot mortgage their forms of life of today for the sake of an uprising which doesn't have structure and form and leadership. I believe this day has to come. Maybe we have to wait some good years for this. But I cannot envisage any real change without Palestinians united in a structured, very thoughtful uprising in the country, and probably with the help of Palestinians all over the world, but very structured and with the leadership that they trust.
Wow. There's, I have a number of questions, but I'd rather ask you to ask your questions at this point of Amira. Terry?
Yeah. You didn't use the word, so I'll use it, apartheid. And you didn't mention South Africa as a settler colonial enterprise. And organized resistance and successful approach, it would seem South Africa is a good model. And I would understand if you don't use those words.
Repeat the question. All right. I was actually asked why I didn't mention apartheid. Omission. I mean, that was the truth that when I was interviewed before by Michael, I said we cannot reverse settler colonialism because it established its facts on the ground. But settler colonialisms have also all kinds of products. And apartheid is one of the products of settler colonialism. It was in South Africa, it is in Israel. Segregation here that ended officially, but we all know that in some parts of your country still exists, still some kind of forms of apartheid exist. Certainly economical apartheid exists. In your country, we know what are the most weakened groups of society are. We know that they are descendants of African slaves, and we know that they are the Native Americans. They are at the bottom of your hierarchy. So this is, again, this is the byproduct of settler colonialism. And in Israel, it is the forms of apartheid that exist in the entire country. It was just an omission because I did not yet end my talk. And I agree with you. What we can do is end apartheid. And again, when we end apartheid, as we see in South Africa, we know that in South Africa, economical apartheid is still very strong. So it is not, there is no magic solution that in one stroke of the hand will completely turn the things and end all injustice. This is, I think we already can allow ourselves not to be so naive to believe that this is possible. All over. These things change. You know, sometimes I bring an example that when did women get their right to vote in France? France, the mother of the bourgeois revolution, in 1945. So the idea that the revolutionary stroke will reverse things, will change things dramatically, is naive.
Joe, please.
One of the things you said is that right now, the Palestinians, there is no trusted leader to deal with the Israelis. Would you say in the last 10, 15 years, Palestinian leadership, people in power, have been marginalized, influenced, infiltrated by Israelis' way of thinking and dealing with Palestinians? So there is no leader that really exists. Everyone is just there, everybody's floating, they're getting by every day, everything is a status quo, and really nothing can change.
Sorry, repeat the question.
Yeah, but maybe you cannot give people to the next questions.
We don't have a long enough course.
So maybe, okay. There was a question about the leadership, again, Palestinian leadership, that has gone through a process of being compromised. Being compromised to Israel, being compromised ways of thinking, and I could add due to the Oslo Accords. You know, I think that here you have an example of myself as an Israeli. To what extent can I criticize Palestinians in general? I've lived long enough among Palestinians to have a lot of criticism. But then I ask myself, how? Do I know everything? So let me start with the end. Like what we see that the most compromised leader, like Mahmoud Abbas, that people see as compromised, he is not signing the agreement that Israel would have liked him to sign. He does not agree to capitulate on the surrender arrangement that Israel and the United States want him to sign. The most compromised Palestinian leader, the one who is continuing security cooperation with Israel in spite of all the criticism, he doesn't sign this. So even here in this, what you say, the infiltrating, the spirit, even here you see that there is a very clear red line that they don't cross. But I think that the main compromise of the Palestinian leadership was indeed to subdue any resistance, or they are acting as on lower levels of Palestinian life when you need to have when you need Israeli permits, or Israeli, and you need it for almost everything, when you need Israeli approval for something. The Palestinian Authority doesn't act as the ambassador of the people or as the representative of the people vis-a-vis Israel, but the opposite. They act as the representatives of Israel in front of the people. And I'll give you examples that I learned about from being a journalist. The issue of the mixed marriages, the spouses, the foreign national spouses, who are married with Palestinians for many years. The Palestinian Authority does not represent this cause. I know, I heard from Elaine and from Zogby, her husband, that the Palestinian Authority doesn't have any leverage here. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if, like 10 years ago or 12 years ago, when there were still negotiations, if when they talked to diplomats, talked to Americans and others, and said, listen, we want to be able to give those women, mostly women, the status of residents. This is impossible. This is impossible that women who've been living here for 10 years, 20 years, cannot come and go freely, are not considered residents, are always afraid for their ability to remain in their own home, and that it's Israel which decides, for example. But let's say that this is difficult. You have those lawyers that it's annoying that we need lawyers for this. But you have several dedicated lawyers who represent such couples. And then one of the Israeli arguments is that these couples did not submit their request for family unification. This is the bureaucratic step. You ask for family, you apply for family unification, and it has to be processed on the Palestinian side, and then to be given to the Israeli side to finally give the approval. So what has happened, what we discovered over the years, because since 2000, and actually since 2008, Israel froze the whole process. Israel told the PA, don't give us those applications. And they don't give them those applications. Then when the couples go to High Court, the Israeli representatives say, but we don't get an application from there. You see, I mean, this is evil, but why collaborate with it? We try to tell them, take it and bring it to the door, to their door, and we'll photograph you. And then you say at court, we brought it, they just didn't take it. But why collaborate with this Israeli demand? I have many other, I mean, I think it will be a bit, maybe too much here, but as a journalist, I confront many of those examples, where what happens is that you give Israel more, the Israeli bureaucrats, I mean, military bureaucrats, they know that they can rely on this passivity of the Palestinian Authority. And that's why people have to go to lawyers. That's why people, but there are many such examples that I confront. Look, for example, with Khan al-Ahmar, the Bedouin village. When the Palestinian Authority decided to gather energy and resources and to make it into a global case, it succeeded.
By the way, we were in Khan al-Ahmar last September, those of you who are with me, and we'll be there in another week and a half.
Okay. So it is late. I mean, I've been covering the developments in Khan al-Ahmar for at least 12 years. I think, again, also here, the PA came in very late. But you saw the logic of it when it does come in and does organize mass movement around it. It is heard. Lawyers on behalf of the PA filed all kinds of petitions that managed to stall this eviction process. But this is a fight. You have to regard yourself as a leader of a fighting people, of people in resistance, but they don't.
You need to act like it. You need to act
not like
it.
to understand, but they live. Look, from the start with Oslo, and this was one of my open criticism. They behaved as if they were a state, which is nothing more delusional than this. There is nothing more delusional. It is not a state, and they are not a government. But why call yourself a government? And by the way, also Hamas. Why call yourself a government? Call yourself a council. Call yourself a committee. Show that you are not a state. Because the self-attitude, or when you relate to yourself as a state, you give the illusion to others that you are on a par with Israel. And that's the world. I mean, I remember when I spoke outside, immediately after Oslo in the 90s, I saw that people in Europe were sure that occupation was over. They were sure. They bought this, they ate this, what do you give the fish? Yeah, the bait, yeah.
They swallow the bait.
They swallow the bait, yes.
John?
I wonder if you are invited to speak to synagogues while you're in the States, and could I ask you for a few minutes to imagine that this is the local synagogue and you're speaking to the members of the congregation?
I think everybody heard that.
Yes, everybody heard that, yes. No, I have, there is a Jewish woman active in the Committee for Just Peace in Israel and Palestine who initiated this visit. I think there was something about, I think there was one thing planned in, I'm not sure, I didn't go into the details, but the answer of course is no. Neither synagogues nor certain Jewish center, even though many of the activists and people who do come to listen until now are Jewish. But of course the official, even J Street would not invite me. So,
It's all right. What would you say to them?
Yes, I'm speaking. I would be even harsher, much harsher than with the things that I said here. Because I have this habit, here it's more difficult, but I have this habit to say to people what they don't like to listen to. So I know in some places when I talk about American settler colonialism, people are not happy about this. But I think you are enlightened enough to bear this truth. But in some places here in the United States, when I speak about it and speak about genocide of the indigenous people, they are angry with me. They think that I want to exonerate Israel. So I would say to those people, I would tell them, you know, what my father said. He had a brother who remained religious, Orthodox Jew, whose children went to settlements. They settled in settlements. And that's why we never had any relation with the children. And also with their father, my father's brother, we met very, very rarely. The gap between us was too deep. My parents, as I told you, were communists, and the gaps were and not because of religion. This was not a problem. It was about the face of Israel and the policies towards the Palestinians. These were the main issues. And then my father's brother died, and he was buried in Israel. And my two cousins, who are settlers, came with their friends. Especially one cousin was very militaristic and messianic. He came, I don't know what, they came, a group of them, probably they were in a religious military school. They came with guns and with uniforms, straight from the settlement. And I saw my father was boiling, you know. And while the body was brought down to the grave, my father stood up and he said, your Judaism is not my Judaism. There is nothing to connect us. Maybe only our history together in the ghetto. But otherwise, there is nothing to connect us. He said, this is not the Judaism we were brought up in our childhood in Romania. So I guess, you know, I would say I would bring, when I still was invited sometimes, not here, but I was invited, there was a time when I was invited to give talks to Anglo-Saxon Jews who live in Israel. Who were very polite. They were not with me, but they were very polite. So they were also polite enough to invite me to speak. And I would bring examples and ask them what is Jewish about it. I brought, and Elaine just mentioned before, the issue of unequal distribution of water in the country. The Palestinians have access to much less water than what they really have, because Israel is in control of the water resources in the West Bank. And I would give examples about Israeli soldiers who are sent to demolish water cisterns, water that collect rainwater. I asked them what is security about it and what is Jewish about it. And I know that it was then hard to stomach. These were things that are hard to stomach. I know that now those groups and synagogues would not invite me because they don't want to hear. They don't know the details, but they know that those details they don't want to hear. And I have many for them.
Jay, please. Go ahead.
Earlier you gave us a really good example of colonialism and the fact that they decimated the native people in order to gain population strength, is what I gathered from that, which gave them political strength, because you said throughout the talk, the strength can come in numbers. Israel, when we were over there, we heard talks about Israel seeking to increase immigration of Jews to Israel to get to about a 70% or maybe higher population growth and total percent of the population in all of Israel and the West Bank. Can you tell us more about that particular strategy and how it's playing out today? We saw it in the settlements. We saw the expansion of the settlements and quite frankly, a lot of American money causing that expansion and enabling that immigration to happen in terms of housing. But could you tell us more about the immigrants that are coming in, and is that an effective strategy, and is it still happening?
I think they could.
Yes. Immigration to Israel or growth of Jewish population. The immigration doesn't strike me as very massive. Look, there are many Russian Jews who came when the times were difficult for them in Russia. And if allowed, they go back to Russia, or they live between the two places, or they keep the two nationalities. You have French people who came at certain times. Many of them came. And they also returned. So they keep very fancy houses in Israel, which is problematic for the housing scene, because it raises the prices. But they live most of the year. They live in France. They say that there is talk about anti-Semitism. Not all of it is propaganda. There is a problem. There is a problem that they face in France. The same thing you have with British Jews that now are making Corbyn into a, I don't know, new threat. I think it has more to do with his socialistic views than his other views. But we don't see that there is a mass movement of Jews emigrating to the country. It ripples, and everyone is one too many. This is one of the things when I meet with young activists, Jewish activists who are anti-occupation, and who have dreams to come to the country as immigrants in order to join in the struggle against occupation, I say don't. Do it in your respective countries. Don't come because you will actually add and participate in a crime if you emigrate. But these are tiny numbers. Those who are on the left and want to emigrate, and the others too is not very significant. What is significant is the birth rate of religious groups, in religious groups. Orthodox Jews mostly, they can have 8, 10, 9, I don't know, 10 children. Also settlers, which are not that, I mean, religiously they are maybe more flexible.